Good morning. My name is Edward Czerwiński. I am retired professor of Jagiellonian University and senior medical director in FutureMeds. Being orthopedic surgeon, I am involved with bones since 1972 and with osteoporosis for 30 plus years. I treat patients and I also perform clinical trials. I was primary investigator in almost every medication which are on the market now, from alendronate to romosozumab, and I continue that, of course. I invite you to my Academy of Osteoporosis, which consists of 12 lectures. It covers I think, majority or almost all the essential knowledge about the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of osteoporosis, which will be, I hope, helpful in your everyday practice. That's the aim of the Academy. So I invite you to the first lecture, and today I'd like to present to you the definition and epidemiology of osteoporosis. The subject I like to cover is the definition of osteoporosis, prevalence of fractures, projection to 2050, consequences of fractures, secular trends, and of course, a summary. The definition of osteoporosis hasn't changed since 1984, and it's written that it's a skeletal systemic diseases characterized by a lumbar mass, microarchitectural deterioration, and a consequent increase of bone fragility and susceptibility to fracture. And here we have the cross-section of the vertebra, and this is normal bone tissue. We see the trabeculae, and below is the osteoporotic vertebra. So we see the poros from Greek, osteoporosis, and this vertebra is not resistant to the force, and this force is just the earth gravity, and will slowly broke. And the structure of the femoral neck, and the force which cause the break is fall. So there is quite different story about the vertebral fracture, which are due to gravity, and non-vertebral fracture, which are due by the falls. Diagnosis criteria are the diagnosis we do on the bone density measurement. It is basically accepted that if the T-score is minus 2.5 or less, that means there is osteoporosis, and we are really interested in the fracture, is not the BMD. And we have another lecture on the diagnosis, but here is you see the scan of the proximal femur and T-score minus 2.8. That means this lady should be diagnosed as heavy osteoporosis. Lifetime risk of osteoporosis fracture in 50 years old women is 40%. It's almost the same that ischemic heart diseases, and higher than stroke. Of course, one of them is hip fracture and breast cancer. The incidence in the population in this segment will be 30% of women and 8% of men. The incidence varies in various countries, from 3,000, more than 3,000 in Russia, Western or Europe, about 2050 in United States, and in somewhere South Africa, very, very low. If you have a standardized of the hip fracture, it varies from country to country. It may be striking that in Poland we have 263 fractures per 10,000, while Slovakia have the border is 45, and Sweden is the highest. We just divide the population to moderate risk, like Poland, high risk, like Slovakia, and very high risk of fractures, like in Sweden. What is really frightening that in 1950 we have 1.6 million of hip fracture, and 2050 there will be 6 million, so 5 times more. Why we expect excess fracture? The two reasons. One is the increase of the population. In 2000, we have 6 billion of population in the world, and 2050 we have 9,000. Population in Europe will be not growing, and if it will start from 2030, will be just decreasing, unfortunately. That's have more people, more fracture. The second, we live longer. In 1770, the lifetime expectancy was 30 years. It is the era of French Revolution. And nowadays, the average in Europe is 70 years. It is changing from population. Here we have the life expectancy at birth, and we see the very high 83 in Sweden, and much more low in Poland and Eastern Europe. The highest lifetime expectancy is in Spain, and for women is 86.7. The Europe average is 84, 81 in States, and the lowest one in Russia, 79. Similarly, men live everywhere shorter, unfortunately. So we have here highest in Spain, 81.2, in Europe, 78, US 76, and in Russia, 68. What means that women in Russia live 70 years shorter, and men even 13 years a lot, isn't it? So why are more frequent? Because the older population, the highest risk of fracture. It is our study from some years ago, and you see that incidence for proximal femur fracture in the group of 55 years is 16 for 100,000, and is just 1,138. This is 9 times higher. So this if the average year of population is increasing, so the fracture risk increases almost. And then is the percentage of the elderly population, and you see in Europe we have 30%, 14%, 21% in 2025, and 30% in 2050. 1/3 of population it will be very hard to cope with that figure. So what is the projection up to 2050? First, increasing of fractures. In 2017, we have in Europe 2,000,007 fracture, and we will have 3,000,007, and in the world 37 up to 45. Then all of them will increase. In yellow we have some and the fractures, and hip are in blue. It is in Europe. So over this 14 years we watch 23% increased. The problem in osteoporosis are the fractures, and especially the hip fracture, because it induces a dramatic deterioration of quality of life. 50% disability who don't survive, 25 long-term treatment, love independence. What's the most important that in a year, 20% of women and 25% of men will die. And after the first fracture of hip, the next risk of the next one is increased 6 times. The mortality differs in various countries, and this is the mortality due to fracture per 100,000. Lowest in Spain, 72, average in Poland, 113, and the highest in Slovakia, 216. Hip fracture are rare in comparison to others, only 20%, but cost of them is 57%, because they have to be admitted, hospitalized, have to be operated, either fixed or replace the hip to the artificial hip. So the more striking is a yearly lifetime lost in Europe is 26,000. That's the years. We have 1,160,000 quality adjusted life years. And what that means, so daily is a disabled adjusted life year, so how long you are disabled after the fracture, and while are years lost due to fracture, and the years with disability will leave the fracture. So you see that daily is 1,170,000 per year. And cost, there were 37 billions in 2010 and 57 billions in 2029, and this will unfortunately increase. That means that the 57 billion of cost in Europe yearly for one person per capita in Poland is 18 euro, and UK 82, and almost 400 euro in Switzerland. Daily loss by diseases in 70 countries, as we compare to osteoporosis to other. So ischemic heart diseases is 6 million per 1,000, and fragility fracture is 2 million. So are really important, only 1/3 of the general loss of dailies, and much more higher that ischemic stroke or osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. And now we'll talk some secular trends, and what it is the tendency of change in normal epidemiology between generation, including changes due to some biological development under the influence on civilization development. It is a non-evolutionary phenomenon devoid of genetic base. It has an adaptive nature. That's the definition. What does it mean? That in fact, that we have increased of fracture risk. We globally foresee the increase. We have 11 countries where incidence of fracture is decreasing. It is Singapore, Denmark, US, Canada. However, it's still increasing in 5 countries and now changing 40. Here we see the secular trends with this increasing Lithuania, Ireland, Bulgaria, Poland, unfortunately, and decreasing UK, Poland, and Hungary. And so this we have secular trend of percentage of fractures in United States, because we could suspect the number of fractures will be increasing. In fact, it is decreasing, and it was due to introducing DEXA testing free of charge and bisphosphonates. So here we see a slope of decreasing fracture, but there is another change, secular trend. In this moment, there was publication of the typical femoral fracture, and people stop treatment, and the diagnosis of have another secular trend. So this is the lecture, and now summary. The definition of osteoporosis is the same, mean low bone mass, changes in microarchitecture, and structure with the susceptibility to fracture. After 50 years of age, 30% of women and 8% of men will have osteoporosis. And the lifetime probability of fracture in women will be 40%, while the probability of breast cancer is 12%. We observe the steady increase of number of fractures, and this is a result from the one side of the increasing of population. And the population in 2000 was 6 billion 15, and in 2050 will be 9 billion 74. And the second is the expansion of the lifetime expectancy. In Europe, in 2010, there were 3.4 million fractures. In 2000 and 2033, will be 5 million, almost twice. A number of the hip fracture in the world increases from 1950 from 1,060,000 and will reach almost 6 million, 22 million in 2050. The number of fractures in women increases with age in geometric progression. E.g., in Poland, we observe 16 fractures per 100,000 in the group of 50s, and in the group over 85, to have 1,138 fractures. And the frequency varies in various countries. Will be the lowest in Spain, highest in Slovakia, and perhaps in Russia. The biggest problem in osteoporosis is the proximal femur fracture, because within a year, 20% of women and 25% of men will die, and those who survived 50 will be disabled. Mortality after the fractures is in Europe is on 116, and the lowest in Spain 74, highest in Slovakia 216. As a result of osteoporotic fractures, 26 people die, and the loss of daily is 1,560,000 per year. The annual cost of treating osteoporotic fracture in Europe amounted to 37 billion in 2010, and will reach 57 billion in 2029. Reducing the incidence of fracture is possible, and we have 11 countries, including US, UK, Denmark, others, and we observe the secular trends. That means instead of increasing fracture rate, we observe the decreasing. It was, as we compare 2015 and 2019. Reducing the incidence of fracture involves the prevention, diagnosis, treatment of osteoporosis, and especially preventing another fracture, because women who sustain the first fracture has the highest risk of another fracture. So this would be the end of the first lecture. Thank you very much for attending, and I invite you to the next lecture, and I hope you will like it.